Welcome to this brief history of the Little Golden Books and how to determine the value of a Little Golden Book. So, Little Golden Books began as an idea by a man named George Duplay, who was head of the Artists and Writers Guild at the time. So, this was like the early 1940s. And at that time, books were very expensive and really only owned by really wealthy people. So a children's book at that time was like $2 or $3. And just to give you a perspective, a loaf of bread at that time was like 10 cents. So books were really expensive. And like I said, they were really only owned by wealthy families. And the books were also really not geared for children to read to themselves and then like handle themselves. They were bigger books that were stories that adults would read to children. And they would have some illustrations in them, but they weren't like the picture story books like we know in Little Golden Books. So this man, George Duplay, contacted people he knew at Simon and Schuster Publishers, and they partnered with Western Publishing and Lithographic Company to make affordable picture storybooks. So that's how Little Golden Books were born. And the first Little Golden Books were only 25 cents. So this was a huge deal. Totally different. It was something brand new in the publishing world. And they were made available in bookstores and department stores. So previously, those expensive books, they were only available in bookstores. Everyday children, they would be able to access books in libraries and at school, but they really didn't have them in their homes. So they started out, they were 25 cents, and a few years later, after World War II, they started selling them in five and dime stores, drugstores, grocery stores, just everyday places where regular middle-class people would do their shopping. And it really was a big deal at the time, and it was extremely successful. So the Little Golden Book stories also were a very different kind of thing. Like I mentioned before, the stories before, like adults would read to children, they were more like fairy tales and folk tales, nursery rhymes, and that sort of thing. But the Little Golden Books were stories that focused on everyday life from a child's perspective. So it really kind of brought books to children to appeal to them and make them want to read. They were small, they could hold them in their hands, and they were filled with pictures to really capture their attention. So the first Little Golden Books were published in 1942. So they hit the stores in October of that year. And these books I have right here are the first 12 that were published. So they didn't start out with just one book. They actually released all 12 of these titles at the same time in October of 1942. So these hit the stores, and they were super successful right from the get-go. So the initial release, they had a run of 50,000 books for each of these titles. And that was the first edition. So editions, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that, what editions are, but it's a print run. So however many books they print in an edition, once those books are sold, they will decide if they want to print a second edition. And they determined how many books to print in an edition based on like sales projections and that sort of thing, how they think they're going to do. So these books started out with a first edition of 50,000 copies of each of these. And they sold out so quickly that in the first 5 months, they went through 3 print editions of these 12 titles. And they sold 1.5 million books in those first 5 months. So it was a huge hit right from the get-go. And just a little trivia note, the biggest selling children's book of all time is one of these 12, and it's The Pokey Little Puppy. I thought that was kind of neat. So let's see, I've got my notes over here. So let me just show you the 12 books that were initially released. So, and this is the order that they were released in. So the 3 Little Kittens. Oh, also, the 12 books that were released, I only have 10 of them. I am missing 2 of the titles, and those are, which 2 am I missing? I wrote it down, and I here it is. Nursery Songs. I don't have. I have a later edition of Nursery Songs, this book here, but this is a different cover. The original cover, it was different than this one. So I'm missing Nursery Songs and a book called Baby's Book. And the actual title is Baby's Book of Objects, but the cover just says Baby's Book on it. That one's really hard to find. I have found copies of Nursery Songs, but I don't have that one. But I have all the other 10 in various states of condition. But these are the titles. Three Little Kittens, Bedtime Stories, The Alphabet from A to Z, Mother Goose, and a lot of these books were changed later, like the cover art would be different. Sometimes they would have a different illustrator come in and do a different version, but these are the original covers of all of the first 12 books. Prayers for Children. This one has a whole bunch of different covers that you will see in later years, but this was the original cover. Same with The Little Red Hen. This is the original cover, The Little Red Hen. I'm doing these kind of in order of the 12 titles. They all came out at the same time, but they kind of have an order that they list them in if you ever see a list. The Pokey Little Puppy, The Golden Book of Fairy Tales, This Little Piggy, and The Animals of Farmer Jones. So these were the first, like I said, 12 titles. I've got 10 here. And they started out, they were 25 cents each. And they stayed at that price, 25 cents, until 1962, where they went up to 39 cents. And then every few years, they increased about 10 cents a copy. But these were really affordable and very easy to find in lots of different places. When the books were originally published, they actually had 42 pages in them, and 28 were color and 14 were black and white. But during the war, so in 1943, they published them in 1942, in late 1942. So it was October when they came out in the stores. Sometime during the year of 1943, during the war, they decreased the pages to 28. To save on paper. So this book here, The Animals of Farmer Jones, is one of the 42 page books. And you'll immediately know because it's a lot thicker than the pages or the books that have 28 pages. And so this one, you can see it's got color illustrations, but then it also has some black and white illustrations in it. And this one is 42 pages. So these are more valuable. We'll talk a little bit about the different kinds of things that determine a value of these books. And obviously the very earliest ones with the 42 pages are more valuable than the ones that are 28 pages. The first 35 titles, so these are the first 12, but the first 35 titles that were printed, and this happened between 1942 and 1943, they were actually printed with a blue binding. So, right, the Little Golden Books are famous for their foil spine. Well, those titles originally actually had a blue spine. So I only have a couple of the titles here, or the books here, that have the blue spine. And what I did not know until I started doing some research is the books that have the blue spine actually had a dust jacket on them. I have never seen one with a dust jacket. So once I found that out, I actually went to eBay and searched for Little Golden Books with a dust jacket. And there were actually quite a few on there. Those are worth a lot of money, as you can imagine. Like I said, I have never seen one of these books with a dust jacket in the wild. And yeah, so that's super valuable if you ever find one of those. Condition has a lot to do with the value. So if you find a dust jacket and it's ripped or it's in poor shape, of course it's not going to have the same value. But just to have the dust jacket still there when so many of them do not have it, just does increase the value quite a bit anyway. And yeah, so I'll talk about that when we get to the value condition part of it and how you determine the value. But I thought that was really neat. So they had dust jackets on them, just the first 35 titles. I could not find when they stopped printing the dust jackets. I've really searched and searched. I need to get one of those little golden book value guides. I'm going to get that, and I'm hoping there's going to be some more information in there. So if I learn some other things about the little golden books that's really interesting, I'll share that with you guys. And some of you, I think, already have some of the guides. So if you know any like little tidbits or trivia that you want to add to the conversation, please put that down in the comments below the video. I think this is so fascinating. So the dust jackets, it's so funny. Even though these were printed with the blue bindings, the dust jackets actually had the artwork that's like on the foil. So it would be like a, actually it looks sort of like this color, not the gold, but kind of like a tan color with little illustrations in it. And that was printed on the dust jacket. I was going to get one of the books with the dust jacket for this video, but I think the cheapest one I saw was $50. And if you find a book with a dust jacket in excellent condition, they're valued at $100. So yeah, so it's really kind of special. So now I'm getting all my books mixed up, but that's okay. So let's talk about the editions. So I mentioned earlier that a print run would be an edition. So they named the editions with a letter of the alphabet. So a first edition would be A, and then on down the line. And every time they printed a new edition, they would give it a letter. And they sometimes printed the letter of the edition in the back of the book. Of these 12 that I have here, only 2 of them have the edition letter printed on the back of the book. So most of them, let's see, I think it's like this one. No, not this one. That's not a good example. A lot of them will just say the printing number right on the copyright page. So this is probably not going to focus. I can't ever get my camera to focus when there's other things in the background. There we go. So copyright is 1942, 7th printing. So this doesn't tell you what year this was actually printed. It was probably just 1943 because they printed so many of these editions, like one after another. But this one does not have the letter in the back. The letter is almost always underneath the spine. You have to actually lift up the spine a little bit and you'll see a little letter. So I will show you an example of that. So this Bedtime Stories. So again, it was printed 1942 because it's one of the first titles. And this one, if you lift up the spine, you can see... Sorry, I'm trying to find the camera. It's an A edition. So this was in that very first batch of books that was printed. This would make this pretty valuable, but there's a couple things. The condition of this book is not super great. You can see the spine, the foiling is coming off, it's peeling up. There's a lot of wear on the corners. The corners are really soft. This corner is kind of dented here at the bottom. And the pages inside, and I'm going to talk about all of this when we're talking about the value, so I'm kind of getting ahead of myself a little bit. But the pages have some marks on them, some stains on them, whatnot. So this is not a great condition for this book, but just because it's one of the first 12 and it's an A edition, that automatically gives it some extra value. This book here, Animals of Farmer Jones, this one, you can see the edition O is way out here. Normally it's right under the spine. It was tucked in the corner of the page and then it's covered up by the spine. But for some reason, this one is way out here. So this is an O edition. So O, the letter O is pretty far down the alphabet. So they had printed many editions before this particular copy was printed. So that kind of tells you a little bit about the book. And of course, an A edition is going to be the most valuable because it's one of the earliest printings of a title. So the copyright date. So every single book will have a copyright date on the copyright page. And that does not tell you how old the book is. So a copyright is just when the book was written and illustrated and published originally. So you can find a book that is many years old. I don't have any right in front of me, but like if you have a book that is from the published or printed in the 1970s, it could still say copyright 1954. It doesn't mean that that book is from 1954 and that many years old. That is just saying when it was originally published. Usually it'll say like copyright 76, and then it'll say comma, copyright 1954. It will put all the different copyright dates on there. But sometimes they don't. So let's see. I did not write that down. I made in my notes a couple of notes about some of these particular titles just so I could show you. So like this book here is copyright 1942. But this particular one I'm holding in my hand is in the 6th printing, January 1945. So this was actually 3 years after the book was first copyrighted that this one was printed. So sometimes it would just say on the copyright page what printing it was, and it wouldn't have a letter in the back. And this one does not have a letter on the back. So I'm not really sure why some of them don't have the letters. When I was doing my research, they said that from 1942 to 1946, the letters were actually on the first or second page of the book. Well, none of these have a letter on the first or second page. They either don't have a letter on them or it's on the last page. The books that were printed between 47 and 1970 are the ones that have the letters on the last page, like you saw in the examples I showed you. So sometimes the actual reality of what I'm seeing on these books isn't what it's supposed to be. Like for another example, like this book here. So this one, we determined this is one of the first 12 titles, and it was, the copyright is 1942, obviously, because that's when the books came out. And I have an A edition, so this was in that first print run. But why does it have a foil spine? I don't know, because the first 35 titles in the beginning, when they were first publishing them, were supposed to have the blue spine with a dust jacket. So I don't know why this one is like that. So there's a couple little mysteries that I haven't been able to figure out, but overall, I think the history is really interesting, and it's still kind of fun just to kind of figure out when you find a book, is it maybe worth something? When you talk about whether something is worth something to a collector, I mean, none of these are going to be super, super valuable. Now, when I was doing my research, they said there was a couple books that were in mint condition. Now, mint means it was never read. It really has to be super brand new, right out of the packaging, looks like it was never even opened. Those would be exceedingly rare, and there was a couple that were listed for sale on an auction site for $1,300. Doesn't mean it's sold for that. I couldn't find any information about ones that have sold. Maybe those value guides will have that kind of information in there, but that would be super, super rare. So let me go ahead and start talking about how to determine the value of a book that you might come across. So there's lots of different factors that go into deciding the value of a book. The very first thing, obviously, is how old is the book. So the books that were published in the earliest years, 1942, 1943, are the most valuable. And of course, in that category of those first books published in the first year or so, the ones that have the 42 pages, like the Animals of Farmer Jones, those are more valuable than the ones that were printed just after that in the following year with the 28 pages. And then obviously an A edition is more valuable than any of the other editions. And then if they have a dust jacket, that also increases the value. So when they talk about condition, so besides just the, dates and all, the condition has a lot to do with the value of a book. And also a couple other things. I'm going to talk about condition last because there's a lot more things that go into that. But a couple other things that will make a book more or less valuable. How rare the book is. This is another thing that I don't know if the guides would be able to tell you this sort of thing. But some of the Little Golden books were only published in, like, say, a short run. So they don't have as many copies out there in the wild. So those would be more rare. One way you can sort of kind of get to know book titles and which ones are more common and which ones are more rare is just to look at places like eBay frequently, and you get to know what books you'll see, like the same titles over and over. So if you see a book title very often, that one's more common. So that one wouldn't be as valuable as a book that you don't see as often. If you see a book and you're like, wow, I've never seen that title before, it's probably a rarer title. And of course, that would increase the value of that book. So it just kind of is a matter of getting to know Little Golden books. And like I said, maybe the value guides will talk a little bit about which titles they didn't print as many of for whatever reason. Another factor that gets taken into consideration is whether or not the book was written by a famous author or illustrator. So books by, like Garth Williams, Richard Scarry, books illustrated by Eloise Wilkin, Corinne Malvern, like really popular illustrators and authors, those books tend to be a little more valuable. So that brings us to the condition of books. So they usually rate books with just names. So you would have like mint condition, like I mentioned, that would be a brand new book. Very, very hard to find an old book that would be considered mint. It doesn't necessarily mean that it was like in really good shape to be mint, like with no damage or anything. It really means that it's a new, not read book. So that's reserved for mint. The next category down is fine condition. So that's something you would also hear people call excellent condition. So that's a book that's been read, but it still looks new. So this book here, this was the 13th title that they printed. So this was 1943. And this one, they were still doing the blue binding, so this would have had a dust jacket. If this had a dust jacket with it, and the dust jacket was in excellent shape, this book itself is in really, really great shape. So this one could be worth a little bit more because of that. Like the inside, front cover, and back cover are in really good shape. The pages, there's no pages missing, there's no tears. There's only a couple little spots that I noticed. Like there's one there, and there's one on this page here. So very, very minimal, but it's still, it's something. But I think this would probably qualify as an excellent condition book. And even though it doesn't have a dust jacket, because it's so old, 1943, this one would be worth maybe, I don't know, maybe $40. So like I mentioned before, like one of the early books in their dust jackets, they're worth $100 if they're in excellent shape. Books that were still old but don't have their dust jackets and are in excellent shape are about $35 to $40. So, you're not going to get rich like buying and selling Little Golden books, but if it matters to you and you think something is like that sort of value, that might be a book that you don't want to take apart. Totally a personal thing that you have to decide what you want to do. But just to give you an idea, when we say they're valuable, we're not talking like hundreds or thousands of dollars, but probably, $35, $40. Like this one, I think would be maybe about that, $35, $40, because it doesn't have a dust jacket and it's in excellent shape. So the next category down is good condition. So a good condition book, the pages and the cover will be worn. So nothing torn and no writing, but the pages could be worn. So, the edges, the corners might be like really soft, maybe bending a little bit. Like this book here, the only writing is this pencil. Someone went through and marked every page with a page number, but it's pencil, so that will come off. Otherwise, there's a little bit of pencil writing right here on this page. So I would say this book is probably considered good condition. So again, you're just going to have some wear on the covers. Like this one, you can see the edges are wearing, and the pages have a little bit of staining on them, but I think this would still qualify as a good condition book. Poor condition would be a book that has any torn pages or writing on the pages. This would probably also be poor condition because it's not a page that's torn, but part of the cover is torn in a couple different spots. And that's a shame because the inside of this book is in really excellent shape. So this book is in super bad shape. So this one this would be probably still poor condition. The lowest condition is junk. That's the, condition rating. And a junk condition is a book that's missing pages or the cover. So I would say most of the books that you find used are in good or poor condition. And sometimes you get lucky and you find ones in excellent condition. So I don't really have any here that I would say are excellent condition. Maybe the animals, I don't even think this one would qualify because of the spine. It's kind of worn. It looks like it was taped at one time. Yeah, this is pretty worn. Like I said, this Golden Book of Birds is probably the best example of an excellent condition book. So this book is in really bad shape. You can see these pages sticking out here on the side. So the first 4 pages came out from underneath of the binding and they just taped them to the cover. So this poor book is in really bad shape. There's writing on most of the pages. There's staining. This page is ripped in half. I guess it still wouldn't qualify as like a junk condition because it's not missing pages and the covers are still there. So this would just be considered poor condition. There's a few salvageable pages in here, but it's in really, really poor condition. And the cover has scribbling like with crayon on it. It's got some staining on it. The back's all scribbled and written on. But this is my example of this book here. So now you can see all the different sorts of conditions that books can be in, and that's really a major factor. So again, the older the book, the earlier the edition. Obviously, if you have a dust jacket, those things make a big difference. How rare your book is, and of course, the condition of the book. So even an excellent condition old book is going to be worth maybe $35 or $40 at the most. And even on eBay, so I buy a lot of books on eBay. I just find they're easier to find that way. Finding the older books is really hard in thrift shops and Goodwill. Antique stores, it's a little bit easier, but I find they're about the same price in antique stores as on eBay. And for me, just to search eBay and have so much more selection just suits me better. And I've also gotten to know Little Golden Books and get familiar with the different titles and the different covers that changed over the years, which ones are more common, and that sort of thing. And I should look and see the completed listings. I've seen them, offered for certain prices. I don't know if they ever sell at those prices. Most of the time, I would say the books are sold pretty close to their actual value. Sometimes you'll see a book and the seller is asking, $25 for a book that was published in the 90s or something. And that's probably not worth that price. But any of these older books, if I find them under 15 with shipping, I feel really good about that. So, let's see, what else can I share about that? Yeah, so it just depends, again, like on the condition. Hopefully there's good photos. If you're looking on eBay, you can really get multiple photos and see the condition pretty well. And I would say anywhere between, $4 and $15 for the majority of books is reasonable. And, you will see sometimes some of the rarer titles or the ones that are in really good shape go for about $25, and some of them are worth $35 to $40. So that would be a pretty good deal if you're looking for books just to kind of keep in your personal collection. So a lot of these books that are older, and even though they're not in great shape, I will probably keep them for my personal collection. And if I find a better copy at a decent price, I will probably grab that and maybe use or sell one of the copies that I have that aren't in as good of shape. So hopefully this gives you some kind of idea about how to determine the value of any little golden books that you come across. I'm sure I forgot to share something, so let me know if you have any questions, if there's something that I didn't cover. Hopefully the history part was kind of interesting, and I thought it was fascinating. I like to get nerdy with all the kind of history of things. I like to know where things came from, how they started, so I thought that was kind of fun, and I wanted to share that with you guys. So yeah, let me know if you have any questions. Thank you guys for checking this out, and I will talk to you soon.